Right. Live people, let's just restart and we'll go from there. Okay. So welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the Christann Gainey case. So Christann is a nurse who is being criminally charged. She actually already was criminally charged and just took a plea deal. So we will be looking at this. Once again, we're looking at these nursing cases to try to see what we can learn from them, what implications this has on our healthcare system overall, and how to make patients safer. Okay. I think with a lot with the Radonda Vaught cases that I covered that were in news, there was a lot of stress around, oh, people are just making excuses for her. This isn't people. I'm not trying to make excuses for anyone. I'm trying to look at how, it feels like the entire healthcare system, the judicial system is kind of targeting nurses, and nurses are getting the blame for a lot of things. And it's just crappy. We shouldn't be operating within, I don't think, a criminal system. We should be operating within a civil system, because if we operate in a criminal system, no one else is going to want to step up and come forward and tell everyone what is going on, because they're going to be scared they're going to go to jail. So that's kind of the framing of this. What has happened in this case is a patient has passed away. So if that's something that you don't want to hear about, we're not going to be going into much detail, but that is something that we will be discussing. It is horrible. It is tragic. This is in no way downplaying what has happened to this person or their family. It's because I don't want this to happen to more patients and more families that I'm talking so much about this type of stuff, because if we don't look into this and make people aware, then we're going to make healthcare even more unsafe. And this is going to happen again and again and again and again. So let us start. So today, if you are not familiar with the case at all, and yes, Jack's Runner, we are going to be talking about how almost all fall prevention devices are considered restraints. I did not know that so this case happens in a nursing home. Someone had mentioned earlier, the nurse is taking care of 37 patients. They said, hey, this must be in a nursing home. No hospital will let you have more than 6 patients. Hospitals will let you have more than 6 patients. But you're right. This is happening in a nursing home or a long-term care facility. And it is insane how many patients they have. And that's going to be a core thing, because what I want to do today is talk about what the situation is and what we can do to fix it going forward. Because I don't want these to just be like, this is so unfair. I want you to walk away today with tangible solutions that we can actually implement. So we will be looking at all of that. So here is the basics of the situation. Take that off. We'll see if I can computer. So this is Christann Gainey. The case occurred in 2018. A former nurse at Philadelphia Senior Care Facility pleaded guilty to misdemeanor neglect of care, dependent person, and tampering with records in the 2018 death of this patient. I also don't like to talk about the patient's names in my chats. I've gotten some criticism for that. It's not to deflect it away from the patient. It's to be respectful of the patient, because I don't want anyone to ever Google their loved one's name and to have my video talking about how healthcare sucks and is blaming nurses to come up, because that feels really disrespectful. So if you ever look at that, that's what's going on. As we go through this case, we're going to be going through the CMS report. This case, then CMS report, in case you're unfamiliar, is Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They are the ones that pay for 80% of long-term care facility care in the United States, because that is where long-term care facilities are typically mostly populated by people who are older and people who have other disabilities, and that is all covered under Medicare. So CMS is, since they're the one paying for all of the care, they are also the one investigating it. Basically, what they do is they go in and they do routine audits, and they say, hey, we're paying you to keep these patients alive and well and healthy, and for them to leave your facility in a better way than we sent them in. And in order to make sure that's happening, they go in and they investigate. And this was one of the cases that they investigated, because obviously something horrible happened. And so they're going to investigate cases like that. So we will be looking into this. I will say that I am not a lawyer. I am a semi-professional Googler. This case has a lot of details that are absent. it has not been as well reported whatsoever compared to like the Radonda Vaught case. It did not get near the immediate attention. I think there's several things playing into that. I'm sure race is part of it. I'm sure part of it's because she's an LPN. And part of it, I think, and nursing in general can tend to be a fairly racist little bugger. And we don't generally stick up for our LPNs, which is ridiculous. So we're going to be looking into today, but I don't have all the details. And I just wanted to get that out there. I also might make mistakes because, again, not a lawyer, just a Googler. And I've only really been a professional law Googler for 1 week. So I am still in my infancy. All right. Shall we get started? I'm like confused because of our failed first start. I'm like, what have we even already talked about? Okay. So let's go through. I want to talk, first of all, let's just go through the charges. So the CMF's charges, this is going to be, I need to sit over here. There we go. Okay. The CMS charges, this is what they wrote up in their gigantic document that let us know, hey, this is what's going on. A review of the facility policy, abuse, neglect, or exploitation dated last approved. That's just saying when this all went into effect. Each resident should be provided with a safe environment, and residents should also be protected from mistreatment, neglect, exploitation, and misappropriation of property. Continue to review of policy revealed that facilities define neglect as a failure to provide goods and services required for the sustainable health and well-being of the resident. Neglect is further defined as a failure to provide goods and services to avoid physical harm. Neglect usually occurs on an individual basis when a resident receives lack of care in one or more areas. So this is just kind of setting the scene. How CMS reports work is they say, hey, you were neglectful of the patient, and then they're going to tell you all of the ways that they found in their research that you were neglectful. So this is them setting the stage and saying, this is our definition of neglect. Now let's see what actually happened. I guess, so we'll go here. A review of facility policy, neuroevaluation. Any resident with the potential for head trauma or having an acute change in level of consciousness will receive 72 hours of neurological evaluation following the notification of a physician. In addition, the policy indicates that neuroassessments were to be completed as follows: every 15 minutes for the first hour, every hour for the next 3 hours, every 2 hours for the next 4 hours, every 4 hours for the next 16 hours, and every 8 hours for the next 48 hours. If you're like, why on earth are we talking about neuroassessments? Let's look at what the charges were that brought us here today. So in our case, Christann was the nurse. She was a travel nurse, which is an interesting point. She was a travel nurse at a long-term care facility where our patient was admitted. Let's see where here we go. He was admitted on April 9th, 2018. He had previously been in the hospital for a stroke. So he needed to go to long-term care. He was placed here. On day 9, so the day he was admitted, he had a fall. We're going to see a repeat pattern here. Now, when I was looking at this, I was like, why is he falling so much? Because as you can probably see, as I put up here, there are going to be a total of 5 falls. And this 5th fall is the one that actually led to the charges and unfortunately led to the patient being found unresponsive when he passed away. So the charges that are being brought against Christann are that she was neglectful. She failed to report she lied in her charting. And I think they initially charged her with reckless homicide. Like I said, she took a plea deal. It got lowered to a lesser sentence. She's doing house arrest, can't get her license back for like 5 years. But why did he fall so much? Because that's a lot of falls in a very short amount of time. And I found that there is something called the right to fall. Now, I have never worked in long-term care. That's another thing I should say. I've never worked in long-term care. I've only ever worked in the hospital. So I should have remembered her name. There's a great in TikTok and Instagram account of someone who has worked in long-term care. And she has provided a lot of insight for that. So I've learned a lot for her. I will leave her account down below. Definitely go follow her because she's going to be the expert person to kind of follow through this, as she has had direct knowledge of it because she's worked in it. But there's something called a right to fall. And I had no idea about this. And what it basically says is that in if you are a patient in long-term care, you have autonomy over your body and you will not be like restrained unless it is absolutely necessary. Because what they had found was years ago, I believe this went into effect in either the late 90s or the early 2000s, where long-term care facility patients were just being restrained. They were being strapped down to the bed, tied down, and left. And so, as with many things, we kind of rebounded in a quite an impressive other direction. I understand it after looking at it, but you cannot set bed alarms. You cannot have side rails. All of those things are considered fall restraints in long-term care. So coming from a hospital, a bed alarm, if you're unfamiliar, would be as soon as your patient like starts to lift out of bed, the bed senses that their weight is gone and it sets off an alarm. And we always have all of the different bed rails up in the hospital in order for the patient, like like a toddler, like my kids' toddler beds, like if they roll, they're going to hit the side. They found when they were researching that in long-term care, patients were more likely to get injured because they would still try to climb out of bed against the side rail. And then they would get actually like more harmed and mangled. And by the time the bed alarm went off, it wasn't saving falls. I didn't see though, in my opinion, like I said, I've never worked there. I feel like if a bed alarm went off, though, it would at least notify you that something might have happened so you could find the individual sooner. But that is the setting for this is you have a right to fall because all of standard safety type things we do in the hospital are not implemented in long-term care because it's considered a restraint. The way they promote fall precautions and keeping people from falling in long-term care is encouraging like grippy socks, just like we do in the hospital, frequent toileting. So taking them up to go to the bathroom so that it's led by you versus led by them so that you could have someone there with you, removing carpets, making sure cords aren't there, generally trying to promote a safe environment in that way. But that is why we have so many falls. So we actually, looking at this case, so the patient was admitted on the 9th. They came out of the hospital that day. Fall number 1 was on that same day. Fall number 2 was on the 10th. Fall number 3 was on the 11th. And fall number 4 was at 2:00 in the morning on the 12th. Later that night at 11:30 p.m. is when the patient was found after another fall. All of these, as far as I know, were unwitnessed. And 11:30, that fall is the one that then led to the sequence of events that we are going to be talking about today. So that's a lot of falls. That's a lot of unwitnessed falls. That is just a lot. And that's kind of the context of what we are looking at. In my experience, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, it is odd to me. I thought it was odd that no one had done anything. Like we're falling all the time. This is a patient that just had a stroke. So they are almost positively on a blood thinner in order that they don't have a stroke again. So a stroke is when your tube gets clogged. So your veins are going all over your body. And if the plumbing gets clogged in your heart, it's a heart attack. And if the plumbing gets clogged in your brain, it's a stroke. So he just had a stroke. Pretty much most of the time you go on blood thinners after a stroke if it's a blood clot type of stroke. So he's more likely to bleed, and he's already fallen 4 times. Why is this person still at this facility? That was what I was thinking. And then I was looking on, the best Google machine ever, TikTok, and I was watching this person who I wish I could remember what her account was, and she mentioned that if you get readmitted to the hospital after being in long-term care only for a few days, like you have to be there for like 30 days. And if you go back to the hospital for something, like they don't pay the long-term care facility because it's considered like a failure. And so if they get readmitted, they're like, well, you didn't really do your job, obviously rehab, because like he went right back to jail, or not jail. It felt like jail a lot. The hospital. So they don't get paid. So do you think, just kind of like setting the stage for this, do you think that long-term care facilities are going to prioritize sending their patients back even when that would be what would be best for them? Because no, I do not think so. Charmene, yeah, facility take any patient for the money. My long-term care dementia father was made hire a sitter for him because he kept getting up. Yes. So if you want a private duty nurse to come sit with your family member, you can do that, and then they can help keep them in bed. But they do not have the staffing in these long-term care facilities to be able to manage this, because look at this. So you might be thinking, well, like, okay, why can't they like frequently round on their patient? Why can't they do all of these things to keep them in bed? It's because they have this many nurses. That's a lot, one nurse and this many patients. So on the day that this happened, that fall that happened in the evening here of the 12th, Christann had 37 patients. She did have at least, there looks like there were one or two like nursing assistants going through it, but she had 37 patients that she needed to, here's all the things, like just some of the things that she has to do during her shifts. She has to address all of the new concerns that come up, like falls. She has to give meds. She has to administer treatments, do wound dressings, help people with toileting, do tube feeds, do all the other type of feedings, empty and care for like drains and Foley's, do vital signs, update patient statuses, coordinate care, chart, do baths, all of those things on 37 humans. If you add up all of the time that she was going to have based on having 37 patients in an 8-hour period, not counting breaks or charting, she would have 13 minutes per patient. That does not seem like enough minutes per patient in order to do anything. Some of the reports I've seen said that they thought like, well, adding 20 minutes to every patient per shift would be like helpful, but we aren't even at 20 minutes. So the recommendation is to add 20. I'm like, but friend, we aren't even at 20. So that is I'm setting all of this up for you just so that we can kind of understand this when we are going through the situation, that it's not someone being like, what she did was wrong. She should not have, and you'll find out what she did as we go. What she did was not right, but the healthcare facility that she was at did not set her up for success. And yes, I think someone was just commenting on, let me see, 37 nurses. Yes, someone said, oh yeah, Mary said the 30-day rule is correct, which is just saying if the patients go back to the hospital within 30 days, you will not get paid. I have heard of, I want to try to mostly focus on facts, but like I have seen and heard many cases of people saying like, there were notes all over the desk of like, these are the people that can't go back yet. So we need to do whatever we can to keep them. Which is frightening, that's not at all the way we want to operate. Let me see. There's a lot more that have inside stuff that happened after this incident, but not sure if I get in trouble for sharing, but situation was crazy. Thanks, Liz, for doing the story. Oh, maybe you and I can talk after. This would be interesting. Emily said, I've worked in long-term care for 13 years. People are being discharged from hospitals before they are ready for rehab, and medications get changed from hospital to long-term care, which leads to disoriented patient and falls. And that's a really good idea. And I appreciate you guys voicing this because like I said, and I appreciate looking at your comments through here because I've never worked in long-term care. So I am so naive to how this worked. Like I just had absolutely no idea that this stuff was going on. So let's go back. I think we have set the scene okay. Now let's look at what actually happened. So on the basis, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the case, and then we're going to go detail by detail, just because I think it's helpful to have a general guide of where we're going. Christann's taking this care of this patient. 11:30 at night, he is found in his room. Let's go back to our map. On the 12th. 11:30, this is his second fall of the day. This is a patient with a history of, he had fallen again in December the before. He has obviously fallen many, many times. Like we just talked in the comments, this was likely a patient that was not quite ready to get discharged from the hospital. But the healthcare systems are now, we're pretty short staffed. In case you haven't heard, there's not a lot of nurses. So they're going to get rid of people quicker. This has been happening pre-pandemic, 2018. This has been a chronic problem. Hospitals are filled with sicker patients and we get rid of them earlier. We send them to long-term care, to systems that are not able to support the changes, or we just throw them to primary care, which was my life for a long time. Was you would get patients and you're like, you should not be here. That's a tangent for a different day. Where's my cup? Future video. Oh, it doesn't show up with my green screen. We're here on the 5th. Tangent. Sorry. Christann takes over. She's taking care of them. They do not have a place. He needs to be monitored closely, obviously, because he's fallen 5 times. They pull him up to the nurse's station to have him sit there so that he can be more closely monitored, which makes sense. Unfortunately, he sits there and just being at the nurse's station, this does not appear to get him better monitoring because he did not get checked on, really, all night. And they have video footage, going in the healthcare facility. It was documented that neuro checks were performed all night in the every 15 minutes and then every hour and then every 2 hours and then every 8 hours, like it had been instructed after a fall. It was charted that they were done, but they were not done. There was even an occurrence of there was a charting done after the patient had already been found not alive. There's YouTube doesn't let you say certain words and I always get in trouble. Not alive in the lobby the next morning, which she did say and she said, I falsified that documentation. Again, a thing where she said yep, I falsified that. We can talk about maybe why she did, but why she did doesn't ultimately matter. The thing that matters again here is, hey, why are we setting these nurses up to fail and then only blaming them when obviously the system is really, really messed up and no one is ever going to come forward again if we keep criminally charging people. If we keep, if they think, oh, well, if I say anything, I'm going to get criminally charged. It's just, that's not the way we're going to make things safer. So that is kind of the entire setting for this entire thing. Let us go back and we will look at the CMS charges. So we've kind of set the scene for that. They did that's telling us what neuro assessments that they wanted every 15 minutes. Any resident this is what she was supposed to do. So, and like I said, the CMS report, we're going to go through it. It's kind of boring, but I think it's helpful to look at the factual things of what was actually reported and what happened so we get a good picture. Because a lot of the websites that I found with news sources, they are not right. So we're just going to go through it and set the record straight. I will have timestamps if you're watching this on replay, so you can kind of skip to what is, if you want to only see certain parts. But everyone who's live, I appreciate you being here. Get ready to go into lawyer speak. Any resident with the potential for a head trauma or injury or having an acute change in level of consciousness will receive 72 hours of neurological evaluation following notification of the physician. So once the provider is notified, they will likely then order all of these neuro checks. That's going in and checking people's pupils, having them make the different faces to make sure their face is symmetrical, seeing if they can recall words. This patient, as we will find out, was having expressive aphasia. So he had a lot of neurological complications at baseline, which is going to make this more difficult. Again, since we're discharging patients in rougher states, these patients are not well. So that's another thing to remember when we remember her 37 patients is this is not 37 people who were asleep. This is 37 people who just got out of the hospital after having a stroke, have fallen 5 times. That's everyone in here. Okay. Just for context. In addition, the policy indicated assessments to be completed as follows: 15 minutes for the first hour, every hour for the next 3 hours, every 2 hours for the next 4 hours, and every 4 hours for the next 16 hours, and every 8 hours for the next 48 hours. Let me just ask you, just as an opinion, if you have 37 patients and one of them falls, and that one that has been falling 5 times, I'm willing to bet that there are a few other patients, right, that have also fallen. Would you not say that's a fair assessment, within the last day? Since they have a right to fall, which that's a whole different thing. You're supposed to be doing Q 15-hour neuro checks on your one patient, and then every half hour, and then every hour. You have 37 patients. How are you supposed to do that? And get everything else you're supposed to get done. That doesn't make sense. But anyway, they think it did. So let's go on and see what else they've said. I'm out of order. It's fine. Let us see. shall provide changes, continue to review the policy, reveal no specific, continued. So they looked at that and they said, hey, you didn't, or you documented the neurochecks, but we found out you didn't do them. That's not cool. Continued review of the policy revealed no specific timeline had been developed by the, so in this, what they're doing here is they're saying your policies are bad, is essentially what they are saying. And they're going to lead this up. The whole article, to be totally honest, the whole CMS article is honestly like, hey, your facility sucks. And then they charge her. So, but the whole article is honestly mostly focusing on your facility really was not doing what they were supposed to. So this is kind of, first, your facility is supposed to do these neuro checks, which didn't end up happening. And then second, we reviewed the policy and it revealed that no specific timeline had been developed for physician notification regarding changes in residents' medical records. So they said, hey, did you know in your policies and procedures, there is nothing written down of how soon people need, like a provider needs to be notified once a patient falls or has a change in mental status? The policy indicated that timeliness may be defined based on the severity of the situation, time of day, and responsible party, designated person, or facility expectations. So what that means is in your policy long-term care facility, you can notify someone depending on how bad you think it is, what time of day. So if it's in the middle of the night, don't worry about it. We'll just deal with it in the morning. And what the facility is kind of expecting you, which CMS didn't appreciate. They said that's not very concrete, and we would prefer if it was less up to individual opinion. Review of, they're going to call, I have these up on the screen just so you can kind of see where I'm getting the info. You do not have to read these, please don't. But CL, just so you know, is the patient that we are talking about that ended up passing away. Review of the clinical record for CL reviewed that the resident had been admitted to the facility on April 9th with a diagnosis including hypertension, high blood pressure, cerebral vascular accident, that's a stroke, expressive aphasia. And we talked about that earlier, but expressive aphasia is, where do I have a thing? Here we go. Also known as Broca's aphasia. It's a type of aphasia characterized by partial loss of the ability to produce language, spoken, manual, or written, although comprehension generally remains intact. So typically people with expressive aphasia can understand, but they cannot communicate. That's going to add another layer. Do you think this patient had that's adding a situation to a patient that's already a falls risk because they've fallen so many times. They've just had a stroke. They're pretty frail. And now they can't communicate. That is, that's not good.
You're glitching a bit.
Come back, Wi-Fi. My Wi-Fi is coming back. Oh, I'm watching the bars go up. Okay. I'm waiting. Okay. I think it's better. All right. Sorry. Brief blip. I didn't want to talk while my internet. It's doing it again. Let me see if. All right. It's coming back a little bit. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Intermission. Internet was not working for me. This is not my day. Maybe I should never live stream during the day again because apparently things are happening. It's probably because my husband's at work. Oh, that probably makes sense. My husband's working. Oh yeah. And you're here. I have a lot of people using my internet right now. Okay. That makes a lot more sense. Sorry. So that's what they were like in that situation. Do you think that that patient is someone that should be one of 37 patients? No, probably not. He should probably have a little bit more help. That just seems to make a little bit more sense. Okay, so we did that one. He did that. In December, he had also, so just adding to the complexity of this is setting the stage for like, hey, these patients are not well. You know what I mean? These patients have a lot going on. He had a prior fall in December of 2017. He had a C6 spine fracture, multiple compression fractures, and a fracture superius ramus. So that's a pelvis. So this patient is not well. And this nursing home is probably filled with patients just like this. So having 39 of them is going to be quite challenging. Further review of the patient's records revealed no documentation and no physician orders related to the patient's code status. This is another problem because one of the things that they charged her with in regard to the neglect was you didn't do CPR when you found the patient. It was the hospital, it was the long-term care facilities policy to always do CPR if the patient was not a DNR. They found the patient and they could not find his code status. So that is that is not good. It just kind of shows you the quality of what is happening. Not her fault that they didn't start compressions because there was no code status entered. That's usually number one thing. Like, people walk into a hospital or a healthcare place and they're like, "What do you want us to do if your heart stops?" Like, that is almost always one of the first questions. That should never have gone undone. Further review of the patient's record revealed no documentation and no order. Okay, code status. It's going to go on and say that you should always have your code status in there. He was also supposed to be having a tube feeding that runs at night from 2 p.m. until 6 a.m. every day. And then they go on to say that he sustained 4 falls while he was admitted. The one on April 12th, approximately 11:30 p.m., he was found lying on the floor near his bed. Facility documentation related to the fall revealed that the fall was unwitnessed and the resident sustained a laceration to the right temple. So he fell. He ended up hitting the side table, like a nightlight fractured. He dented the wall. It was not the poor guy. Like, this was a pretty big fall. Let me see. Practical nurses transferred the patient out into a wheelchair and brought him to the nurse's station to monitor him. So it also is going to come to light that, like, precautions for falls, I mean, what are you going to do when you have 39 patients? And that's something that they're going to argue is that she did not monitor him well enough. And to that, I would just say, how do you monitor 39 people who are at fall precautions, who you aren't allowed to put even we don't put bed rails, we don't put bed alarms. How are you going to keep them in bed and from falling if there's only one of you for 39 people and maybe 2 techs? Maybe. That's not good. So I just say that to kind of point out, like, they put him in the nurse's station, basically, to say, like, I hope we can watch you here. Review of facility documentation related to the resident. The patient's fall revealed that the employee E14 is Christann Gainey, had completed a neurological flow sheet. So this was on paper, I am assuming. You'll find out why. She had completed a flow sheet saying, like, hey, he fell at 11:30 p.m. following the resident's fall and continued and through the morning through 6:20. This is when we run into, she documented through 6:20, but the patient was found unresponsive and declared not alive at 7:17. So why are you charting things after he's dead? Which leads us to think that you're probably just going through and filling it out, because the facility is probably now looking at this and they're like, he's fallen 5 times. If CMS comes to us and asks us for documentation, we are going to have to prove that he fell and that we have looked into it and that we charted and we did all the things. So she falsified her documentation. And I just want to step back and take one moment and say, if you work in healthcare, you have probably falsified documentation. You have probably been asked to falsify documentation. I know I have falsified documentation, not necessarily on huge things, but I'm sure, I know there were times I didn't count respirations. Every time I was like, yep, that looks good. It's a running joke on the internet that we don't really count respirations. Let me see if I can create a poll. Have you ever witnessed falsifying charting? I don't know if that's the right way to word it, but we're going to word it like that. Have you ever witnessed this? I've seen it all the time. We had to give these things called HCG or CHG. Oh man, it's been a minute. Baths, some kind of special baths to all of our surgical patients, right? And almost all of our kids were surgical kids because I worked on a cardiac unit. You had to give them within 24 hours of each other. They would come around and it was highly implied by our administrators that even if the bath wasn't necessarily given within that 24-hour period, your charting needed to reflect that it was. Because if they were investigated, this would happen. So falsifying records. Have you checked the IV perfectly every single hour? Did you go in and really assess that the patient was on their left side and that they had turned, not like for turned patients, but we had to go in and chart patient position every hour or two? Did you always do that? Or did you just kind of peek in the door and be like, okay, yes, they look totally fine. They're fine on the monitor. All is well. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but falsifying medical documents happens all the time because they require so much documentation. And I am not saying that that is right. That was not right when I did it. It happens all the time though, because the system is not setting us up to succeed. And this is just a snowball of this. If you're asked time and time again to, hey, just document the restraints, okay? I know you don't have enough time. I saw this all the time I want to be careful about what I'm saying, but like I worked on a med surg floor and patients, there was a lot of alcohol withdrawal and just all sorts of patients with a lot of behaviors that could be really aggressive. And so we had a lot of patients on restraints, but we had no techs most of the time. We had a ton of patients. Everyone was so sick. When you have patients in restraints, you need to document those almost constantly. It feels like all you are doing is documenting that. So even if you check it, there's times when you document it, like either like proactively, like, oh, I'm going to document this and then I'm going to go do it. I am not saying that is right. I am just saying that nurses are stretched so thin, and not just nurses, techs, everyone is stretched so thin and so much is asked of you. And then if you don't do it and don't chart it, then your job is threatened. So that is kind of the setting of this. I am not making excuses for her. What she did was wrong, but I'm saying that this system cannot keep happening because this will happen again. This is going to happen again because we are asking people to do so much. And it's not going to work. Let me see. Hi, Sophia. Sophia, fun fact, is one of my members. I did start channel membership because I wanted to become a real YouTuber. And you do that. And then next level is merch. But Sophia, I so appreciate you becoming a friend, a super best friend of the channel. Thank you. And hello. One day we're going to get little fun emojis that you can put in the chat. But for now, baby steps. We'll get there one day. Okay. So that's the setting for that. Sorry, I keep going on tangents. People in my last video, there were some people that were very annoyed. I'm just trying to set the scene for people who don't work in healthcare because I think it's helpful to understand why we're talking about this and that it's because this will happen again if we don't fix something. And I don't want it to happen again because it's horrible and it's tragic for that patient and the family. Okay. Okay. So he did this. She charted after the fact, which is obviously falsifying documentation. Let me see. Hang on. I need a drink. I'll mute myself. I'm very new at live streaming, friends. Last time people were like, I could hear you drinking. I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay. So the next thing that they are going to talk about is, they talked to the director of nursing. And they said, hey, she documented things once the patient was already not with us. This was kind of employee E2 as a tech. Observation of the facility's camera footage revealed the following residents transferred to the lobby at 11:44 until 7 a.m., a period over 7 hours. Employee E14 had not completed any of the neurochecks. So this is then saying, hey, even though she falsified the one in the morning for sure, but she documented all the other ones as well. And she was never actually we can see the lobby where they put the patient and those neurochecks were not done, which is obviously not good. And in not making excuses for her and not saying that it's okay, but just remember in our context, we have 37 patients. So there's 36 other people who might have also been falling. We do not know what else that was going on that night. She has not released any statements. I do not think personally that she was probably like, I'm going to leave you in the lobby and peace out. I think it was probably a situation where she was like, there were 36 other people that she was taking care of. And at a facility that she did not work at, that she was a guest at, that she didn't really get oriented to, as we will find out later. I think she was probably overwhelmed. And therefore horrible things happen, which is why we're talking about this. So we can make things safer so that horrible things don't happen again in the future. Also, I'm not against civil charges against these things. Obviously this was wrong. There's some types of some type of repercussion that needs to happen from when these awful things happen. It's the criminal part that people are not ever going to ever bring these things up again. And obviously there's things happening if we're throwing around jail time. Let us go over and see really quick a poll. So 80% of people are saying yes, that they have seen these errors. So that's not good. That's a lot of people. It's not just, you go on TikTok and there's a lot of holier than thou people. Yeah. Let me see. I see in the chat a lot of you momminers, if you had a head laceration, then they should have sent him to the hospital for a CT to make sure there was no acute bleed or injury. I see you. Amanda said the same thing. Yep, we should have been sent out. Was there any loss of consciousness? He was most likely on blood thinners, obvious head injury. It did look like that he was not conscious, that he was unresponsive at one point. But there's not a lot of detail around that, but yes. And we're going to be talking about, we touched on briefly earlier why he wasn't sent out, I think, was because the long-term care facility won't get paid. This was his 5th fall. You would have think after one for me, my patient, so being a nurse practitioner, if I received information that my patient that just had a stroke, got to long-term care, fell unwitnessed, but they think he hit his head, you're going to go right back, sir. We're going to send you right back because this is not good, especially when you have expressive aphasia. So I can't do a neuro assessment on you to make sure you are fine because everything is going to seem not fine. Yeah, you'd go right back, but they didn't because then the facility would not get paid. And yes, momminers, it's CHG baths. That's what I wanted. They're like they're antibacterial little baths, but there you go. So this is not looking good, right? Obviously, there have been many, 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 many mistakes that were made. Let's keep going. They interviewed the physician on call. He is E12 if you're looking at the screen. So they called the physician on call and they said, hey, friend, remember when that patient fell and you took 2 hours to respond even though you were the on-call person, which seems like a faulty system. I feel like usually it's like if you're on call, there should be an emergency line where it goes right to you and you have to respond within 15 minutes. That's usually what happens, but that's not what happened here because they called him between midnight. So patient was found at 11:30. Got him back, got him in the wheelchair, put him in the lobby, called. Remember, they don't have a timeline of when to call because as the CMS report has already shown us, they said it is up to your discretion how long it takes you to call. So they finally call at 12. I mean, they have to get him back in there. It's a minute. I understand. They call at 12. Now we're at the morning of April 13th. There's no provider in the building. There's no supervisor in the building. It is Christann and what seems like 2 nursing assistants for 37 people on the first floor. And he calls back at 2:30 a.m., 3 hours later, 3 hours since the patient fell. And he spoke with Christann and he said, hey, I think it's fine. Let's do the neuro checks. Let's do the neuro checks and see how it goes. Continue review of facility documentation about the resident's fall indicated that the resident had remained in the lounge area, which is what he said to do. He was like, hey, go for it. Just have him sit in the lounge. Remember, we got to get paid. So he's thinking that too. I'm sure he's aware that, hey, you need to be, we're going to get paid. We're not going to send you anywhere. If this was me, there would absolutely be a head CT scan in this person's future, right? So if someone falls in the hospital, for example, we had a lot of people fall on my first unit. Not good, but it happens. Here's the policy. They're on the floor. If it's an unwitnessed fall, we don't know if you hit your head. You are going to get a CT scan of your brain to make sure you didn't have a brain bleed. If it was witnessed and we knew that you didn't hit your head, then you didn't have to do that, but you were still getting vitals and neuro checks and all of these other things. But an unwitnessed fall, always, 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 even if you were in there for pre-surgery or I don't know, something where you were very healthy, you were going to go get a CT scan of your head, my friend. So if this was me and I got a phone call that, hey, your patient has fallen for the 5th time, they are getting over a stroke. They're on blood thinners. They have a very complex medical history of many fractures. They have expressive aphasia. They can't communicate well. What do you want to do? My answer would not be continue with neuro checks. It would be, friend, call the ambulance. I've also seen pushback of, well, why didn't she just call the ambulance? Because That was not the policy where she was working, and she was a guest in this facility. This was not her primary job. She was a travel nurse in this place where she did not know anyone. She's unfamiliar with the environment. That is not a position, especially if she's newer. I don't know how long she had been a nurse. That's not a position where you are like, hey, I'm going to go rogue and do my own thing, because you're going to get in trouble with your agency or this facility. So she didn't want to do that. And I think, she maybe should have just called 911, but I understand why she didn't. Okay, let's look at this. So they have, this is kind of what happened the next morning. They were found April 13th at 7:35 in the morning, or he was found at 7:15 in the morning. They confirmed maybe an administrator gets there at like 7:30. They confirmed that there was no resuscitation attempts to be found. Now, I don't know why there were no resuscitation events. I don't even want to guess, because it doesn't really matter. If I was guessing, it might have been because it was so clear that the patient had maybe passed a little bit a while ago. However, the policy for this place is, unless there's a DNR, so a do not resuscitate, then you need to perform CPR if someone is found unresponsive. And if there's no order, then you have to. So there was none. So they should have started CPR. But again, there was no order because the healthcare provider didn't write one. So they're also tying this in with hey, why didn't you do CPR? And to part of the neglect, which is why this matters. This talks a little bit more about the gigantic hole that the poor guy put in the wall. Let me see. This goes through, and it's saying that they talked with the director of nursing, who verified that at least that last one was falsified. And then they went back and they looked at all the records and said, hey, she actually didn't do any of these neurochecks. Further review of the patient's clinical record revealed no documentation that upon finding the resident unresponsive, any nurses had tried to call 911. So they didn't call 911. They didn't call CPR. Someone at this facility, obviously their training here might not be the best. Maybe she didn't know. That is going to be a situational thing where different long-term care facilities probably have different rules. Maybe at ones she had been at before had different rules about resuscitation. This one didn't really tell anybody, as we will see in a minute. They didn't have good onboarding for hey, this is what you're supposed to do. But they're saying no one in the facility called. So kind of hey, this was a universal failure here. Even you, director of nursing, why didn't anyone call? They got the patient back in bed. The employee who found the patient had said, what's the code status? But they could not figure it out. Obviously, that's not good. That should be the number one thing that people come up with. It was later found, the coroner gave the cause of not being alive anymore as blunt force trauma from his fall, which is incredibly, incredibly sad. Reviewing, they looked at, let me see, this one is the night that they had it. Indicated that interview with employee E8, a nursing aide, revealed that the patient's bed, they returned the patient to the bed in the morning and the patient had soiled themselves. So this is just trying to further the case of neglect, that hey, the patient had not been checked on by the nurse overnight to do the neuro assessments. But here they're also saying that the nurse aide that was supposed to be with the patient overnight had not checked on them to offer them toileting throughout the night. And technically, since the nurse aide is working with the nurse, usually the way it works is you are in charge of your assistive personnel, and everything kind of comes back to your license. So you as the nurse, you delegate. I am honestly not sure how that works with LPNs. I would imagine it would work the same, that if you had CNAs working with you, it would come back to your license. If I asked someone to go get vitals for me and they didn't, that would still fall back to me as not doing it, even if I had asked, because I should have ensured that it happened. So they're saying, that's why they're bringing this up here, is they're saying she was also neglectful in that she didn't follow up with the CNA, because the CNA didn't check on the patient overnight and offer toileting, which is going to further risk falls and everything like that. And they shouldn't have to sit in soil for that long. It is a very common, not to diminish this at all, but sitting in your own bodily fluids is very common in long-term care, because remember, there are 37 patients. There's one of you and there's 2 techs and there's all of this going on. So it is horrifying. And that's what we're trying to like kind of fix a little bit here. So this is saying that they had security footage. They are the resident. They found them at 6:30. They couldn't find the code status. Okay. The patient had a scrape on his knee, and they had said, they were talking just about how he was like injured, like he needed to have more attention and he did not have the attention that he needed. So, let us look really quick at how many falls there were, because I think this just kind of, like we'd already talked about, sets the stage. We kind of went through the timeline of all the falls. The falls were unwitnessed, but they were also not documented. So this kind of just lays more of a thing of, I don't understand why people are targeting her when this was obviously a problem that was happening all week. The fall on April 10th. So that was the second day at the facility, revealed no documentation of the residents' vital signs as per facility. So they weren't doing vital signs. The fall investigation analysis sheet showed no documentation of staff analysis of the resident's medical diagnosis. So they didn't like assess. Usually on these things, you have to write down like, hey, I think this is why the patient fell, what we can do going forward, and making a new plan. There was none of that. This root cause analysis, it's saying like they didn't look into the hospital, or the long-term care didn't look into why this was happening. What could we do to keep it from happening again? Obviously it was going to happen again, because then we had fall 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that if you looked at the neuroassessment documentation, they were missing 7:15, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, on and on and on. There was no documentation in addition that witness statements had been obtained from staff. So they didn't even ask the staff about the fall. And then this continues. This is literally the exact same case, exact same situation with all of the falls. This happens with fall 3. Things aren't documented. Vital signs aren't taken. Records are not kept. With falls 4, which leads to fall 5, right? Because we have now had 4 falls that were not documented, where vitals were not taken, where neuroassessments were not charted, and nothing is happening. Why is nothing happening? Because this happens all the time. This happens all the time. Christann got unlucky. Like, we're going to go rogue off chart for a moment. Christann got really unlucky that her fall, the fall on her watch, was the one that led to the fatality. Because if you look at it, no one else that came before here charted. They didn't do the neuroassessments. They just didn't do them. And so if it had been one of them, I think this case would have been about them, not her. Should she have charted? Yeah. Or no, she should not have charted, because she did not do them. And I'm not making excuses for her, but I'm just saying, like, this was not, everyone else was perfect and then she came in and messed up. This was clearly, things are not going well at this facility. And if it's not going well on multiple shifts, this leads me to believe that it is not a nursing problem. This is a system problem. And if you are going after individual nurses, we have so much data and so much research that says if you go after individual nurses, you are not going to solve the problem. All you're going to do is scare people, and they will shut up and they will not report events in the future. What we need to do is we need to look at the system and say, how can we make this safer? Which is why we're talking about this, because criminally prosecuting nurses scares them. They aren't going to talk. They won't say, hey, this is actually happening at my facility, because then the people are going to turn around and say, did you ever do that? And they're going to be like, and that's not the problem we want. We want to create a culture where it's okay to come forward. That's called like just culture, where it's a safe environment to come forward and report mistakes so that we can be safer in the future. Okay. Here's some things that were interesting also that were happening in this. No changes were made to his fall plan after previous falls, as we discussed. A review of the resident's comprehensive care plan did not indicate that it had developed any new person-centered interventions following each of the falls that this patient experienced. So every single time, they didn't change anything. They were like, let's just rinse and repeat. I'm sure it'll be different next time. The care plan included approaches such as participate in physical therapy as scheduled, wear appropriate footwear and non-skid socks, and provide supervision. You need to provide supervision and hang out with all of your other patients at the same time. So then they came back and they said, well, our interventions were to wear socks and be monitored and have supervision. So why didn't you supervise him? And it's like, well, maybe because she had 36 other patients. But anyway, A interview with the director of nursing stated that supervision could be several things, but would not elaborate on what those things are. So they said, hey, supervise them. And then they probably came at her and they were like, well, what did you mean by supervise? And she's like, it could be several things. Not helpful. So remember how we had talked about the patient had not been documented on, they hadn't had their vitals checked and they hadn't had neuro assessments. Again, not that that's okay. But they didn't have a vitals machine on the floor that was working. So that's going to also impact your care, right? Based on, during an interview with Employee 9, it was reported that the Dynamap, which is a portable blood pressure and vitals machine, that was used to monitor vital signs, including blood pressure on the first floor, had not been working for a week. Observations on the floor revealed that the blood pressure machine was plugged into an electrical outlet in the corridor and did not turn on when the switch was activated. During an interview at the time of observation, reported she was not aware the machine was not working. The employee 11, who was the registered nurse that worked there. That seems like a problem. If your only vitals machine on your first floor doesn't work, then you can't really yell at her, because part of the thing, I mean, like, that's not a good environment, right? That's probably a red flag. She was also charged with, they said, hey, you also didn't document this. But interestingly enough, an interview with a nurse, the assistant director of nursing, confirmed that per facility policy, the nursing staff was expected to document on the status of all residents. So they went back to the management and they said, hey, assistant director of nursing, where's the documentation? And the director of nursing said, you're right. It is our policy that this should be documented. And if they fall, like the proper documentation follow-up needs to follow for 9 consecutive shifts. All residents who have been included in a 24-hour report, and all residents who are new to the facility also need to be documented for 72 hours. And she said, yep, you're right. Confirmed that this employee, Christann, did not write a note on all of these patients, which is interesting because she didn't write a note because she didn't have access to the charting system. Interview with employee 6, a registered nurse and night shift supervisor, confirmed that employee E4 that she had not written any nursing notes related to the occurrence of the fall because she didn't have computer access, and subsequently had not entered any clinical documentation or notes on any of the 37 residents on the floor that night. So she was charting the neuro assessments, obviously, that she didn't do, which is a no-no, on paper, because that was where that flow sheet was. But she didn't have computer access, which also makes your job really difficult. Really difficult if you are in charge of that many different humans and you don't have access to a computer. So this place is it's not setting people up to be winners here, right? Let's look at what else didn't exactly go wrong. Further, in a review of the facility assessment revealed no information was provided related to the ethnic, cultural, religious factors of the residents. Additionally, there was no data, no data about staff education, training, or competencies required to provide care. So they don't train people. They said, well, where's your documentation about the training that all new people have to have when they come into your facility? And the facility went, huh? So that's not a good look. Let us see. So I think we've covered all of he was identified as a high falls risk patient. So this is another thing that they're going to harp on was the high falls risk, which is when they said, hey, he has to wear socks and be monitored. And they were kind of like, you didn't do this. You didn't monitor him. And she was like, well, we don't know what she said, but there's 46 of them, or 37. I don't know where 46 came from. So if you are thinking, well, this doesn't sound safe, how did this get criminally charged, though? Where did we go from this just being reported and looked into? How did we get it to be criminally charged? Well, you may remember from the very, very beginning of this conversation, the patient's father. Well, where is your information, patient's father? The patient's father is HR McMaster. if you'll remember, this happened in 2018. At that time, HR McMaster was the National Security Advisor of the United States. I cannot find any proof of it, but it would make sense to me. And I have heard alleged that there might have been a conversation where the National Security Advisor talked to someone in the White House and they said, this place just killed harmed, I'm not supposed to say that word, harmed my dad. Could you call and maybe make this more of a thing? And it became more of a thing. I have heard that initially the Department of Health didn't pursue any action because they said, hey, this is a crazy ratio and like this is a very sad situation. Our nursing home ratios are horrific. And then this person, understandably, like that's a horrible situation, called and then things happened. So who decided to press the actual charges? Because as I have found out in my criminal Googling, you can't charge people criminally. You can like suggest it to the state, and then the prosecutors are the ones who actually have to come out and like do the thing. So the person that actually decided that they were going to criminally try this person was Josh Shapiro, who is the Attorney General in Pennsylvania, where I live. So if you live in Pennsylvania, we're going to write him a nice letter. And good old Joshy said this, and we're going to focus on this for a minute because Joshy is running for governor. So he's running for governor. And this is what he had to say about the situation. The defendant has now been held accountable for her actions that led to a tragic death. Attorney General Josh Shapiro wrote in the email release, we have several active and ongoing investigations into long-term care facilities and nursing homes across Pennsylvania and will hold anyone who knowingly neglects a cared person in Pennsylvania accountable. So that's scary. Basically, he's saying, we'll do this to you too, which is exactly what we really didn't want, because then no one's going to talk. Because let me show you, this is not an isolated incident. This is from my TikTok. I used to have 64 residents with 2 CNAs on night shift, my first nursing job. I didn't know any better. I would never do it now. It's criminal. The ratio is why I left long-term care. When I was a CNA, I wanted to cry every time I had to go to work. Long-term care, 42 residents can be done. This is an attitude I would like to see go away. Just because you've done it doesn't mean it's safe. It's not safe. We don't think it's safe. Please stop. Source. Someone said source I can't find anywhere. This was really hard. I will leave everything linked down below. Again, this was a difficult thing to find a lot of information on. I've had 13 patients on a med surg floor. That sucks. We need this. We need so much help. Let me see. We have more comments. Before I left long-term care, I had 57 patients to 1 nurse. Never again. Picture it, Kentucky, 1995. I was the only license for 98 patients every evening shift. That sounds like hell. Long-term care travel nurse here. One of my assignments tried to have 1 to 35. So 1 nurse for 35 post-acute care patients, like right out of the hospital, which is what this patient was. And she had 37 of them. Not good. All facilities and hospitals need to be investigated. You cannot criminally try businesses. So that's why they are criminally trying her, because even though most of that letter was about how, hey, your facility sucks, you cannot criminally try businesses. You can only criminally try people. So that's why we're trying nurses, because the systems suck and nurses are being held accountable. So when working, not saying she didn't do anything wrong, because she did, but does she need to be criminally liable for working in a system that's absolutely atrocious? No. We want to keep people safe. I'm just going to keep saying this. We want to keep people safe. And we don't do that by criminally trying people who are working in garbage conditions. It's kind of like my children. I was thinking about this last night. Like if I keep my children, like if I send them all day to a park and I load them up on like sugar and I don't let them nap and I exhaust them by letting them play on a playground for like 1 billion hours and I spray them with water, which also makes them super tired. And then I ask them to go to a restaurant with me and like sit down and behave. I have not, and then I'm mad when they're a ball of chaos. I have not set them up for success. I need to look at the system and see the concern, like see what has happened. And that's not what we're doing if we criminally charge people for being overwhelmed and overworked. So this person says, does not excuse frauds and lies. I am not trying to excuse fraud and lies. I think she should be punished civilly, not criminally. Before I left long-term care, I had 57 to 1. Yeah, just no. So those are the ratios that we're seeing. What are the ratios supposed to be? Let's talk about that really quick. Because the ratios that are recommended by the CMS, this is the ratios that are recommended in Pennsylvania. If you go to their long-term care, I have all of this linked down below. This is the recommended ratios from Pennsylvania for their long-term care facilities. There should be at least one nursing staff employee for 20 residents. Well, that's interesting because we're looking at 1 to 37. Okay, so 21 to 40 is 2 nursing staff, 41 to 60 is 3, and 61 to 80 is 4. On duty means physically present and personally able to provide nursing care when needed. Okay, so we're not quite there. What happens if people are like not doing well? Let's look at that. So this goes on to say that there needs to be you have to have nurses on staff. You have to have each resident floor requires there must be nursing personnel physically present. Okay, yes, so we have that. I put that on there twice just for fun and to make sure we're all on our feet. I think I accidentally left out the one that was important that talked about what happens if the patient is more at risk. Let's see if I did it. Nope. Scrolling up. Nope. Well, anyway, oh yeah. Is that it? Yes. When more nurses are needed. The department may require an increased number of nursing personnel from the minimum requirements if specific situations in the facility, including, but not limited to, the physical, mental condition of residents, quality of nursing care administered, the location of residents, the location of the nursing station, and the location of the facility indicates that the departures as necessary for welfare and health systems are needed. So basically, if your patient's really, really sick, or if they've fallen 4 times in the last 4 days, if they have a history of a bunch of neck fractures, if they can't speak because they have expressive aphasia, and this is just one of your patients, you should probably have more nurses because that's a lot going on and that's not safe. So that's where we have there. I totally forgot that. So Joshy, remember, he's the one who came out and said he's going to come and charge everyone who works in long-term care, who is in any way neglectful. And remember, he says he's just going to come after the people. And like insinuates that it's also going to be like the place. But remember, you can't charge a place. So what he's really saying there is he's going to go on a manhunt for nurses. If you live in Pennsylvania, he's going to be governor. So that's good. Oh, that's her plea deal. One day I'll learn how to internet. He wants to be the government. He wants to be the government. He wants to be the governor. We're way too long into this chat that my brain's going. You can contact him right here, friends. Right here. PA Office of Attorney General, 16th floor, Strawberry Square, Harrisburg, PA. Here's his phone number. There's his fax number. And there is his email. I have already written him 2 letters and 5 emails. So get to it, friends. You can let him know how you feel. I feel like he's probably going to get elected anyway. It's kind of a bummer because he's probably who I would have voted for governor because he is running for governor. I'm Joshy. I'm running for governor. But I don't like that he's coming after my people. So that's not cool. Let's see, kind of wrapping up the case. She did take a plea deal. So basically what that is she said, hey, I don't want to go to trial because I don't think people are going to vote in favor of me. Again, I'm pretty sure she thought that because she was like, she just took this plea deal like 2 or 3 days ago. I'm pretty sure she saw, hey, they convicted Radonda Vaught, who is, has more like she's white. So I'm almost positive that she probably saw that and she's like, oh shoot, like they're not going to go in my favor. So she didn't want to go to trial. So she took a plea deal and pled guilty. So they lessened her charges. So she has been, where did they say what she had? She didn't do this like briefs, like exactly what she did, but she took much lesser charges. I want to say it was for falsifying documents and for neglect. So she's going to be on house arrest. And then she can't have her license for like 5 years. I don't know if she can get it back after that. It said she can't have her license or try to get it back or work in a nursing home for 5 years. I don't know if she can get it back after that, but that is her situation there. And yeah, so let's take a look really quick. I know we've been on here forever. I am so sorry. There was a lot I wanted to get in here and I can't like condense my conversations. I'm really working on it. I forgot to put this slide in, but it's important. Falls happen all the time. So if you don't think there's going to be more nurses, remember how Joshy was like, hey, I'm going to come after all of you. It's going to happen a lot because falls happen like 3 million times a year that are reported that people go to the ER. So these happen a lot. And apparently they don't get reported a lot because remember, they didn't really even document all the other ones that happened to the patients, just this one. So Joshy, you're going to be real busy. I hope you're too busy to even run for governor. Okay. That's what I hope. I hope you change your mind. I hope you come out and you're like, my bad. What I mean is I want to have patient safe staffing ratio reform. Let's talk about that. So let us look really quick at what we can actually do. Okay. Should we be a little bit proactive here? So one thing that you can do if you want to see improvement in this, the improvement seems to make sense, right? Is we're not going to criminally charge nurses. We're going to look at the system that continuously fails patients and we're going to say, how can I fix you? Well, I am so glad that you asked. Let me show you. We're going to start putting policies in place that respect nurse-patient ratios. We're going to change legislation maybe that says, hey, that holds CMS and everything more accountable into looking into different cases. Maybe we're going to find nursing homes more, like really hold nursing homes more accountable. But in order to do that, it's kind of like which comes first, chicken and egg? We have to have the legislation that says, hey, nursing ratios are important. So let's start there. Let's chop this out. No, I don't want to do that. Stop sharing there. Whenever I have to share a screen, friends, I sweat because it makes me so nervous. I'm going to be doing like a conference. I'm going to a nursing conference in a couple of days and I'm going to be talking in front of like a ton of people. That's going to be fine, but I have to share my screen on the internet and figure out how to navigate that. Sweat. Okay. So one of the ways that we can do this is by figuring out legislation that's going to help with nursing ratios, right? That makes sense. This is National Nurses United. That's like a huge union that a lot of nurses are in the US. I think it's the biggest US nursing union. It's not perfect, but this website was very helpful. So you can go and you can search by national legislation. You can see, hey, like what am I looking for? What are some legislation things that are trying to be safe for nurses? And this is going to keep you from like Googling like constantly. You can look in specific states like California. You can find out like who have your legislators voted, like how have they voted on these issues. You can go to endorsements and it'll tell you like, hey, these are some representatives that you might want to consider voting for in these states. These are the states that are like really involved in the union. So it's not for like every state, but it just gives you an idea. You can also Google, there are several other, if you just search like nursing associations, the ANA has one. The ANA is not the best, the American Nursing Association. However, they do have some that are on policies and you can find it that way. But if you ever hear of any policies, just be vocal and explain. I think the more we talk about why we need safer ratios, because you can't do all of this at once, that's what's going to give us a ground to stand on for things like this. So another thing that is coming to light right now is there is a new, this protecting seniors by improving safety and quality of care in the nation's nursing home. This was a statement release from the White House recently. What they're basically trying to do is this reform. The president is announcing that he will ensure, water. Every nursing home provides a sufficient number of staff who are adequately trained to provide high quality of care. The thing I really don't like about this is we don't know what there's no statement of what that ratio is. And clearly we are not grasping it. So I wish this had a number, but again, we're going to get to that number by including like legislation, like, hey, in your state, you can only have this many patients. Poorly performing nursing homes are held accountable for improper and unsafe care and immediately improve their services or cut off from taxpayer dollars. So you aren't going to get CMS money if you don't improve. This is hugely important. And this is actually a good thing. It's going to hold nursing homes and long-term care facilities more accountable. We'll talk about that in a second. And they want to make it more transparent. So you could look and be like, hey, before I put my parent in this nursing home, what is the situation like? So the one good thing here, and like that did happen, just to leave you on like a slightly positive note, was how we talked about there that they're going to try to hold nursing homes more accountable because where did we see the change? There was a change that had happened a few years ago that lowered the penalty amounts for nursing homes basically before, this link doesn't go anywhere. I wish it did. I tried to find the original statement, but basically what had happened was a few years ago, they had changed the policy within fines of CNS, where before, if CMS went and they investigated a nursing home and they said, hey friend, nursing ratio is not safe. You are not documenting appropriately. Bad things are happening. They would fine the nursing home every single day until they fixed it. A few years ago, they went in and they changed it and they said, hey, we were going to fine you once. And then once we find you, it's done. So that's not super helpful, right? Because if you are only finding someone once, don't you think they would probably be like, well, that sucks. I already paid the money, so definitely not going to fix it now. It doesn't incentivize change. But if you're coming at someone every single day and being like, hey, you're probably going to change because you're like literally watching your money like fly out of your pocket. So this is being reversed. They're saying, hey, we're going to consider charging you every single day again. That way you might consider, maybe changing these horrific conditions when we run into them. Okay, let me do just a few questions. I have kept everyone for a very long time. We'll end in 10 minutes. I think I got all my points across. I sure hope I did. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in here. But again, thanks for being here. Again, we just want to talk about this because this is not the way to see change. The way we're going to see change is by implementing policies, advocating for bills and laws that are going to support nurse-patient ratios, and by advocating for not criminally charging these people. So go and speak up when you see these cases. Go and you can email Joshi, our friend Joshi in Harrisburg, and let him know that we don't like what he is doing. My mom also emailed him, and my mom can get pretty scary with her emails. So you should definitely follow it up and channel Denise's energy. Okay. Channel that energy. Let me see. So CNA to FNP channel on YouTube is a good resource. She worked in long-term care and she started as a CNA, is now an FNP. I follow her. That is a good idea. She's a great resource. I will leave her channel linked below if you want more information about long-term care. Jax Runner said, from a therapy rehab perspective, it's a restraint not to have a bed rail at all times. So it's interesting that, it's just interesting how different it is from the hospital. We had Plum's mom, we had bed alarms, but only on certain people. We could watch and try to stop it, but for 35 people, 2 eyes. Yeah. This place sounds like they were enforcing the no bed alarms. I also saw a lot of stuff about like alarm fatigue, which I totally get. If you had a facility with 37 people who were all trying to get out of bed and a bed alarm was going off all the time, that would keep everyone up and then no one would sleep. And you really would like some of your patients to sleep. Like, I get it. I see why they do it, but it doesn't seem like a good solution. Shalonda said, I was an LPN in memory care for 2 years. Sounds like he needed a sitter. They had asked for one-on-one supervision and they did not get one. So they said that they did not have the capability to do that at that time. And that happens all the time. We all the time had orders for sitters. Having an order for a sitter does not mean you get a sitter. I would say when I worked on my med-surg unit, I don't know if any of you have experienced this. I had an order for at least one of my patients, like probably every day, to have a sitter. Maybe 1 out of every 10 shifts, I actually had a sitter. And they always, we never had techs because our CNAs and techs always got pulled to sit. We never had enough sitters. Just because the order is in there doesn't mean you actually get a sitter. So that's a fun fact. Emily said, I worked in long-term care for 13 years. People are being discharged from the hospital. Oh, we talked about this, how people are getting sent home really sick. Catherine, staffing in long-term care is a bitter cycle. People leave because of the high turnover and short staffing. So unless there's a mass haul of the long-term care facility, the problem is going to continue. Exactly. We have to go and fix it from a law perspective, and then advocating for change and making the public aware of it, because I was not aware of it, how bad this was. And I have worked in healthcare for 10 years. If I'm not aware of it, I'm willing to bet a lot of other people are not aware of it. Kimberly Davis, on my first day as a new grad, I was thrown to the wolves with 30 patients. I asked for help passing meds, and the charge nurse said, no one's going to die today if they don't get their metoprolol. Good. deep breaths. Deep breaths. I bet that was not reported either. You know what I mean? Like, that is not going to be reported if you're worried that if you report it, you're going to go to jail. Whether falls witnessed or unwitnessed, they were, as far as I know, unwitnessed. Definitely the ones on day 5 were unwitnessed. And I think on day 2, I want to say all of them were, though. Let me see if, we talked about you should have gone for a CT. Deborah Smith said was there a supervisor on duty? There was one part that did seem to say that there was a supervisor on duty, but they were not mentioned anywhere else. So I don't know if they were on site or if they were available by phone. My impression from reading through the document was they would have only been available by phone because no one else was brought into the situation. And I would think you would bring someone else into that situation. But what do I know? Yes, they have. Mama Nurse said they have opened the gates for nurses to be targeted for all errors. And I'm scared. And the point of these, I agree. The point of these is not to scare people. I've also gotten a lot of flack for like, oh my gosh, you're talking about this and this is scaring the baby nurses and the nursing students. I am not saying this to scare people. I'm saying this to hopefully encourage you to set boundaries. Do not take jobs where your license is at risk. Advocate for a better profession. And we're going to do that by changing the law and being the squeaky wheel and talking about this. So I also am like super into you walking into your career with your eyes wide open. I think long-term care probably has not had as much advocacy around it too, because the people if you're looking at who's working in long-term care, it's nurses with less resources, right? We have a lot of LPNs. LPNs do not make as much money as nurses. They are not usually connected to like the bigger systems that, if you're like working in the hospital, you're going to have more contacts. If you're in long-term care, you're like more isolated on your own. So they're not going to have the contacts to even like discuss things with people. So they're not in a position to necessarily come and make this huge stink. And they are more reliant on their livelihood, right? Because if you make less money, you are less likely to want to be the squeaky wheel because you need that money probably more because you probably don't have a huge cushion because we pay LPNs like garbage. And so we need to be the squeaky wheel for them, the people who can be the squeaky wheel, because people in the facilities that we're talking about cannot always be the squeaky wheel. They don't have the resources to get lawyers. They don't have, not across the board, but just as like a general, like if you have people who are paid less, you're going to have less resources. That makes sense. Let me see these. Catherine said these errors deserve to be in civil court. Exactly. Where the consequences align with the action. Exactly. Losing your license, not being allowed to work in these places. If someone loses their license, they're not able to reoffend. Exactly. I do not worry that Christann's going to go out and like kidnap people and abandon them on the street. You know what I mean? Like she's not going to repeat this. So why are we making such a scapegoat of her? Well, we know because it's like, who the person was related to. Why is the supervisor not on the chopping block, just the nurse? Exactly. Exactly. Why is it not that the healthcare provider is not getting flack for not sending this patient to the hospital for a 5th fall with a head injury on blood thinners, just having had a stroke? Why why aren't the people who had witnessed the falls for the previous 4 days and not documented anything appropriately? Why aren't we looking at that? Like, why are we only looking at the one person who was on this shift? Like, that's just not, it's not the look. Yeah, it's all on them and the facility. It's apt that only the nurses are in trouble. Exactly. And the facility, like obviously you can't sue a facility, but why can't we hold them more accountable? Like, and like, as people have talked about too in the chat, I've seen people are like, this happens literally all the time, like literally all the time. So this is happening all the time and it just doesn't get attention because not everyone is the father of a national security advisor. So many nurses travel now. Is this going to discourage them from taking a travel assignment? So I mean, I think usually when you usually get this sounds like it was a nightmare of a situation. I don't know anything about travel nursing in the in the long-term care world, but I think it should set some warning signs. Like if you walk into situations like this, if you can leave, but then that's assuming a lot of privilege also that you can just like refuse to work, because a lot of people have to work. Like they're going to go to work and risk their license because they need to get paid. And the likelihood is no one will ever find out. That's just the real situation. It's more likely that you engage in an unsafe work condition, but no one ever finds out because no one usually does find out in long-term care settings. So I think a lot of people take that gamble versus being like, hey, I'm going to set a boundary and I'm not going to work in these conditions. They're going to get paid because they need to get paid, and they can't get hired at hospitals because hospitals have a stick up their booty and want you to have a BSN. And they are like, now they're accepting ADNs now that the pandemic has happened. They're like, all right, I guess we'll allow you in, even though your outcomes are just as good. We'll let you in, even though you don't have all the letters. But hospitals won't let LPNs work in them most of the time anymore. So they have to work in these nursing homes. So they don't have anywhere else to go. So you're really putting people in a difficult situation where they can't stand up for themselves because there's nowhere else to go. I feel like a lot of times in nursing, like if you have your ADN or your BSN, you have other options. There's a lot of jobs right now. So if you walk into work and it's really unsafe, you can be like, bye friend, and leave. Not everyone has that option. And this is getting highlighted with this case. That we can kind of see. Deborah said, management, unfortunately, are very far removed from patient care and are sitting ducks until you set up your standards and boundaries. Yeah. And I'm sure management is getting the thing of like, well, if we send, they're getting from their management of like, hey, we have to get paid. You can't send these people back. So it all comes down to the people who are owning these facilities wanting to get their money at the risk of patients having really bad outcomes. Dang, no blood pressure machines for a week. Yeah, that's just, and like in the thing, it went on to later say like, oh, why hadn't it been reported that the blood pressure, like that the vitals machine wasn't working? And they were like, oh, well, no one reported it to maintenance. And they were like, well, you wouldn't report that to maintenance. That's like a equipment problem, not like a maintenance problem. Like maintenance fixes like your doors and toilets and like paints and walls, but not like equipment. And they were like, oh, but there was no, they were like, well, the nurses should have told the equipment people. But then when they looked at their policies, they're like, but you don't have a policy for that. Like, how would they know to do that? Especially since everyone is a traveler. They were like, oh, well, so that's that situation. A lot of the T-Dog said a lot of the machines do not work. So we're told from the facility to staff to bring our own. Wow. Okay. Wow. We need to have a whole different chat about, we need to have a whole different chat about long-term care, apparently. Where people can tell their stories, but just do it safely. So Deja says, so should future nurses student so I butchered that. So should future nursing students planning to start nursing school like me be concerned about going into the field and not being protected by future employers, or are there ways to avoid this or Radonda? I think there are definitely ways to lessen the chances of having any kind of litigation against you. Being like, you're going to like probably have to put yourself in the situation where you're not going to do anything that makes you like really uncomfortable. As long as you can be in that position, I am not going to take verbal orders until I'm comfortable with it. I am not going to chart things that I have not done. I'm not going to take patient assignments that petrify me. I am not going to put myself in situations or in jobs that are setting me up to fail, because there are jobs out there that are not setting you up to fail. You can take your nurse lawyer or niece. She has a great course on how to navigate, like, do you need malpractice? How should you chart in order to defend your license? I could leave that link down below, but I think the biggest thing is just take your time. Even if people are frustrated with you for the boundary you set, where you say, hey, I'm going to go slow with this, I'm going to take my time. Set that boundary, because you worked really hard for your license and you need to protect it. And also only work, as much as you can, only work in environments that are going to respect you as a human and support you, because there are places like that out there. And then also support legislation, support changes, get active and involved in the decision makings of it. Be the squeaky wheel. You know what I mean? Don't just be the squeaky wheel. point out the issues when people come by for quality improvement. Be like, hi, I have so many improvements that we can make. So many improvements. Be that person. And you don't have to work in the hospital. There's lots of different things within the nursing field. But if you also decide, hey, this is too much, it's totally fine. It's a lot. I have had to take a step back from it the last year. A lot of other people have. Whatever you want to do, like that's a good choice for you. You know what I mean? So if like you're really still into it and you're like, I really want to be a nurse, go for it. Just set the boundaries in place so that you're set up for success. Brittany McDonald said, me running from the bedside with all these cases popping up. Yeah. And that's totally fine, because on the flip side, if you got into this and you were like, this was not exactly what I signed up for, that's also very fine. You're allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to pivot. You're allowed to leave entirely. You're allowed to go just into an adjacent room. You are allowed to do whatever you want, and nothing is an incorrect choice. Okay. That is all. It's all very, very, very valid. James, thank you so much for the super sticker. I appreciate you. Let me see. I think we have a few more comments, and then I have to go pack. I am going to NSNA. If you're going to NSNA, let me know. I'll be there. It's in Salt Lake City. I've never been there. I've never left my children. I've been taking deep breaths all day. I'm kind of panicking. Erica, I know of one facility that had 34 vented long-term care patients with one registered nurse, 2 CNAs, and respiratory therapists for the entire floor. I don't know how to respond to that. That's very bad. Erica also says Illinois finally passed legislation with gradual implementation, staffing ratios, and making facilities post signs at entrances and the nursing stations that clearly say they understaffed. I love that. I love that. That goes along with like the nurse Erica with everything she was saying to put, a lot of times hospitals won't let you outwardly talk bad about them. But you can, she was saying we should all wear signs, like little pins that say, if I look tired, I am, because apparently some airline pilots had done that. They held signs or they wore things that said, if I look tired, I am. Sophia, very sad. Thanks for the discussion. It is really, really sad. It's very sad. Kelly said, my mother's roommate wanted to stay in bed all day, but they discouraged it. They raised her bed height to discourage her. She wound up falling. Good. So in case you don't know, beds can go like up or down. We like to keep them in their lowest position. So if you do fall or you go to get out of bed, you're not like plunging. So that's good. Mama nurse, the whole system is faulty. Yes. Yes. Yes, it is. What can nursing students do to prevent this happening since we're not licensed yet? Again, setting really good boundaries, learning how to chart in a way, that's safe. Norma says she wasn't charged because he fell. She was charged because she charted his assessment sheet that she had completed the required post-fall neuro checks when she never did them. Exactly. The goal, I'm not making excuses for that. Like that is why she was charged. The setting, I was just trying to highlight. No, you're right. She was never charged because he fell at all. But the system that she was in did not set her up to succeed, which certainly did not help why she made that poor choice. You know what I mean? And this is just highlighting how broken long-term care is. You know what I mean? That we are expecting a nurse to do 15-minute vital checks on a patient who's had their 5th fall in 4 days, who just had a stroke, who has a broken back, cannot speak because of some dementia. And this is one of 37 people that she has to take care of, but we're blaming the nurse for her complete overwhelm. Like what she did was wrong, but she's not the only one to blame here, but she's the only one taking the fall. Yeah. Kenneth, if multiple falls have happened previously and management has been made aware and have not decided to increase staffing to prevent their falls, then the liability for this event should not be on the nurse. Yes, because now she's having to do even more work to follow up. She should have done it, or she should have documented that she couldn't do it because she was away. Like that's another thing you can always do, is like document why you can't do it. But remember, she can't document because she doesn't have access to the computer. Nurse Scott, thanks for always coming to my lives, Nurse Scott. I'm sure there's research on the positive impact of mandated nurse-patient ratios in California. There is, I'm sure you're right. So California has mandated nurse-patient ratios. And also he was saying that 30-day Medicare rule sounds like a good thing to change. Yes. It also leads to a lot of, it leads to a lot of problems all across the board. I have had you get in trouble as primary care. Fun fact, if you follow up with a patient after they've been in the hospital, if they cancel their appointment with you, but then they end up back in the hospital, your office gets dinged, and they say you should have followed up with the patient. And you're like, well, they canceled their appointment, or like they didn't tell me they were in the hospital. And they were like, well, that's your fault. So this is a overall problem that we have with hospitals. They don't like people going back in and being readmitted, but they blame everyone but themselves. Just curious if is it possible, this is from Riza, possible family members are relied upon in this setting, long-term care. If so, COVID restrictions messed this up more. I don't know if family members can stay all the time. I know you can hire private duty nurses in a lot of the time. But this was also pre-COVID. But yeah, now it would certainly screw it up because I bet you can't have private duty nurses because I don't think they're letting people in those facilities. All right, friends. Riza, I agree. She definitely should not have lied about it. Like, I totally agree. I just think she should have been charged civilly. Instead of criminally, because that's only going to encourage people not to talk about it going forward. But I totally agree. Like there should have been a civil case. She should not have documented that. I think she was probably terrified for her license. I think she was probably worried that, if I do this, I'm going to get fired. I think it, as we can see, documentation at this facility was not good. So lots of other people had probably been falsifying documentation or just not documenting at all. I think she probably didn't know who the patient was, and if it had been someone else, I do like the Department of Health, from what I have heard, had already said that she would not be they weren't going to do anything about it. It was until then from what I heard, I can't say this for a fact, but then I heard, when the White House came in and they said, hey, we need to do something about that, then she was charged criminally. So I don't think if it was not this patient, none of us ever would have heard about this. And I think this happens all the time in long-term care. And that's why we're talking about this, because criminally charging people is only going to shut people up. It's not going to keep them out and being the squeaky wheel, because they also don't want to go to jail. So what she did was wrong. The hospital system, or the healthcare system, is also incredibly wrong. Long-term care needs so much more reform. It needs so much more in us to vote. So go look at those websites. I'll leave them all linked down below. And vote, be the squeaky wheel, talk about what's happening in healthcare, because it is a hot mess. So yeah, thank you so much for coming today and having a really great conversation. I have looked at I've seen all the comments coming through. I'm excited to go through and read them, but I think I really appreciate the conversation that you guys have in the chat as well. While we're talking, I think it brings a lot of different sides of the conversation. And I always so appreciate it. And thanks for watching. I'm getting into doing these types of more commentary, raising awareness on issues I think are important in healthcare. And I appreciate you. If you're brand new, welcome, subscribe, do all the things to make the YouTube gods happy. I also, like I said, started a membership so you can become a friend of the channel and help me pay my sister who helps me do this. But really, subscribe, all the things. I appreciate you. Thanks so much for coming, and I will see you next time. Also, let me know if there's other topics you want me to talk about, because, things keep popping up. I'm always I'm not going to know what to talk about if I do these, and then shenanigans keep happening. So there's that. All right, friends. Goodbye. Wish me luck tomorrow. Probably going to go start crying soon. I've never left my babies. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. I brought them so many presents. That was probably not the way to cope with that. I got them little Daniel Tiger characters that I'm going to hide in different places and they can find. And then I got a Tony. Have you ever seen those? They're these music boxes, and you put characters on top of them, and then they sing the songs or tell the stories of the different characters, but they're controlled by the kid. I had an Amazon gift card that was supposed to be for me for my birthday, but instead I spent all of it on toys for my children out of guilt that I'll be good. So that's good. That's a little glimpse into my mental health. Thanks for being here. I will see you next time. Remember, you are, what are my things? You are enough. You are not alone. You can do hard things. I'll see you next time.